Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we take a look at an ordinary Imperial Guardsman defending a world against a Tyranid invasion, and how for performing his duty, the Emperor protects. Before I begin today, a big thank you to Davish for the virtual gift voucher. Apologies if I haven't pronounced your name correctly there, and a very merry early Christmas to you too, my friend. Yes, I'm still getting settled into the new home, lots of decorating and things like that to do. Top priority obviously still trying to get the office done, get the computer off the floor so I can get the recording back to a good standard. And again, thank you very much for the voucher, I truly appreciate it. Now on to the story. So the story we are discussing today is called For the Emperor by Callum Davis, and it's actually from a previous White Dwarf from August 2019. I've had a search on the Black Library site and I don't think it's available for separate purchase. So I know I've said before, but I really do think it's worth purchasing the White Dwarf magazine when you see it, because you can find some fantastic little short stories in there each month that apparently aren't available anywhere else, at least not yet. And like I always say, not only is this the best way to enjoy the lore by reading it for yourself, but we also help to support the great Games Workshop and Black Library, because without them, we wouldn't have this great lore we know and love. But with that said, let's jump straight in. Now, this particular story follows a guardsman named Caden, as his platoon is tasked with holding back the Tyranids long enough to get the civilian population evacuated. And the story kicks in with Caden face to face with the grim realities of war. As his platoon marches into town, he is greeted by a stench-filled, decomposing body. One of the troopers from the previous platoon who was stationed there. And it's a pretty gruesome sight, with the whole body having been literally torn apart. Not even the face remains. Bareth, a female guardsman, quips how it's nice of the 3rd platoon to leave their mess for us, as Sergeant Atticus orders them on. There's no time to waste. They walked among scattered bare trees, their foliage ripped from them by combat. Their branches were buffeted and battered by the winds, the woods groaning and creaking as if in pain. When the gales died down a little, the trees' moans were replaced by the thump of distant gunfire. Never on Rymoria were the guns silent. The troopers weaved their way through minefields, the last soldiers in the ragged march ordered to collect the signs. No one knew if Tyranids could understand them or not, so they didn't take any chances. Besides, the firewood was useful. There were no more humans following behind them, so there was no risk. No one asked what would happen if they ever came back to reclaim this land. No one thought that was really possible. Slowly the trees they walked by became greener. Caden couldn't help but notice that these sentinels looked almost as weary as he felt. Up ahead, he saw a settlement. The grey of prefabricated architecture matched that of the dank sky. The place looked abandoned. Flackboard patched broken windows, Imperial eagles bolted to the walls rusted away. Acting Lieutenant Deron leading the platoon halted in front of it. Please let this mean a break, Caden thought. He stopped when he reached the platoon's commander, letting the butt of his lasgun hit the floor unceremoniously. Bareth and Sergeant Atticus joined him. This is Polpero, Deron declared. They were a bedraggled bunch. All were ashen-faced, their hair matted. The men among them were unshaven, weary eyes ringed with black looked over the surroundings with fear of resignation. Uniforms that had once been a proud green had been reduced to a pallid brown. Some of the troopers had managed to get hold of winter weather gear, though most hadn't. More than one irregular had lost their helmet along the way. They evacuated this place yesterday. Now we're digging in, just like last time. And the other time, and the other time. We dig in, hold until the next place is cleared out of people, then get out. How long? Asked one trooper. He was new. Caden didn't know his name. He didn't bother to learn them anymore. More than one veteran shook their head at the young trooper's question. As long as it takes, said Deron. "Will we get reinforcements?" asked the same trooper. Many of the soldiers burst out laughing. Caden found it hard to suppress a smile himself. "Why yes," one of the soldiers replied. "In fact, I've heard that 10,000 Space Marines are coming down just to help us." "I've heard they'll dig your hole if you ask nicely," another added. "Someone told me they'd even wipe you out." "That's enough," said Deron. "Trooper Damiran, if you haven't worked it out by now, we're on our own." The young trooper's face went deep red. "First and third platoons have been merged. They're to our rear. I want defence lines outside the village. Get to it, or the swarm will have you before breakfast." The soldiers dispersed. A murmur of chatter rose. "I still haven't had breakfast for 2 months," Corin said. And it's this type of introduction that just sets the Astra Militarum, or Imperial Guard, apart from the gene-enhanced Space Marines we so often cover. They don't know no fear. They aren't bred for battle, because they are completely human, just like us. We get to see the vast array of human reactions. And let's be honest here, the situation they are in is no ray of sunshine. It's war, and it's grim. There's a saying, if you don't laugh, you cry, and here we see the guardsmen having a laugh. Okay, it may be at the expense of poor trooper Damiran, but they're in this situation, and there's only one way out of it, is to just get on with it and try and survive. By the time they finish digging, the night has fallen. The sky is completely starless due to the effects of the Tyranid spores in the atmosphere. The guardsmen are all cramped into their small trenches and foxholes, which are now partially filled with water. But they don't complain. They're either too experienced or just simply worn down to care. Sergeant Atticus is instilling the importance of the heavy bolter to the inexperienced Damiran. The heavy bolter can never stop firing. If the gunner goes down, the loader takes over and someone takes over loading. During a reload, the flamer opens up and covers the area to keep the Nids at bay long enough to reload the bolter. If they're told to pull back, the gun comes with them. Without it, or the ammo for it, they're all dead. So here we have a squad of guardsmen holding up to fend off the Nids for as long as they can, to protect as many lives as they can. And the only heavy equipment they've got is a heavy bolter. There's no Lehman Russ battle tanks here. That heavy bolter is their best chance of survival. Then, with that, it's time for the first watch, and to try and get some sleep. Caden woke upon the crump of an explosion. In less than a second, he was up, aiming his lasgun over the parapet of the squad's slit trench. The others had all done the same. "What was that?" asked Damiran. "Tyranids probably hit the mines," said Bareth. "Good job we took those sign down," said Corin. Caden couldn't tell if he was serious or not. "They're close," Caden said. "The man's right," said Atticus. "No more watches. Everyone awake. Stand by." They stood by for 3 more hours. The night had been punctuated by flares sent up by the platoon's only remaining mortar. Deron obviously didn't want them caught in the dark. Even so, Caden kept feeling his eyes droop. Much of the squad were slumped back in the trench, with Damiran keeping watch on the line. "What's taking them so long?" asked Corin. "Don't tempt them," said Caden. "They can take as long as they like." "Yeah, the longer we leave it, the more time the Space Marines get," added Bareth. All of them, even Damiran, laughed at that one. For a few precious seconds, part of the tension wore off. "Please, God Emperor, let her be right. Let them come and save us," Caden prayed. Another flare went up, its soft lighting bathing them. The soldiers looked up as it drifted overhead, its movements in the wind strangely captivating. "Sergeant?" asked Damiran from his vantage point. "I think they're here." "What do you mean?" said Atticus, getting up to look over the parapet. He had barely lifted his head over it before he cursed and grabbed hold of the heavy bolter. He started to fire, sending rapid bursts of rounds into the trees. "On your feet, now, fire, kill them all, for the Emperor." And of course with that, all hell breaks loose. The guardsmen let rip with everything they've got, which is little more than lasguns and heavy bolters. But for a brief moment, as Caden's relentlessly firing into the horde, he dares to think they might win. They might just prevail. But he knew they were losing. The Tyranids were gaining ground. The bolter cuts out as the reload is needed, the flamer erupting into life to cover the ground, giving the Xenos an even more terrifying appearance. Though so much of Caden wanted to run, he simply couldn't. He couldn't abandon his squad. Atticus finally gets the bolter firing again, bringing the wrath of the Emperor to the Xeno monsters, before abruptly cutting out, falling to the ground in writhing agony, a Tyranid beetle crawling beneath his skin. Caden rushes to help his sergeant, realising he'll have to cut it out. But it's too late. The sergeant is dead. "Get firing, for throne's sake," Caden heard Corran yell at him. Hands shaking, he picked up his lasgun. He stood, looked over the parapet. The pile of corpses was so deep it was slowing the Tyranids down, just enough to stop the irregulars from being overrun. He started firing. This time, he just felt numb. Impending doom so close he was almost unmoved by it. "Just make it quick. Don't let it be like Atticus," was all he prayed to the Emperor now. The Tyranids continued to make up ground. Their dead meant nothing to them. Their wounded were trampled. They were unstoppable. Caden's lasgun clicked. He was out. Its machine spirit wrath was spent. That was it. He let it fall to the ground and it splashed in the trench's tepid water, now thick with Atticus and Bareth's blood. The nearest Tyranid was so close he could see the insatiable hunger in its eyes. He watched it leap, maw open, claws outstretched. Its single purpose was to kill him, and there was nothing he could do. He clutched his bayonet tightly in his hand, but he knew it was helpless. He felt a heavy object land on his feet. It was Corran, his face invisible beneath a pile of writhing carnivorous worms. Caden saw many of the parasites fall into his comrade's mouth. Terrified, hopeless, Caden closed his eyes as he began to weep. He felt a warm shower soak his fatigues and splatter his face. He opened his eyes. The Tyranid was dead, its body cratered with huge, grisly wounds. He heard loud roars, similar to their own heavy bolters, but from a totally different direction. He saw more of the Xenos killed in the same way. Their bodies were totally obliterated. No lasgun could do that. By now the battlefield was covered in thick smoke. Fire ceased along the line. There was no enemy left to fire at. Caden and Damiran stood up. Out of the smoke marched a warrior. No, an angel. Over 7 feet tall, fully armoured. More of its fellows marched with it, every heavy step crushing dead and dying aliens beneath them, with gratifying crunches. They were the Emperor's might made manifest. They were glorious. Caden got out of the trench and walked towards them as if in a trance. The Emperor heard me. He felt a smile cross his face. He looked back at his comrades and saw they were smiling too. Along the line, the survivors of his platoon emerged to greet their saviours. Soldiers laughed and embraced, stunned that they still lived despite all the horror they had experienced. The Emperor had delivered them from the Xeno horror. Caden dropped to a knee before the first angel he reached. Laying his bayonet on the floor, he gazed in wonder at the armour plate, glorious in its scaled pattern and blend of azure and emerald hues. The chains they wore surely represented an Imperium safely bound and secured by her protectors. The three-headed serpent upon each shoulder guard made him think of the ferocity with which the Imperium's defenders fight. To look upon the Space Marine made Caden feel vaguely as if he looked up at the poisoned stars. But that must surely be the stench of the dead. The angels had clearly traversed the stars to reach them. Caden thought it likely that the feeling lingered on those heroic and selfless enough to travel through them. "Praise the Emperor," he said, "for he protects. Thank you, mighty great angels. You are the answer to our prayers." The angel picked up Caden's bayonet and beckoned him to rise. Caden stood. The angel handed it to him, grip first. For the Emperor, it said, the metallic voice sounding almost amused, clearly taking joy in Caden's humility. Caden took the weapon, hands shaking in pride and wonder. For the Emperor. And there we have it, for the Emperor. The Alpha Legion recruiting loyal followers of the Emperor to their cause. What a great short story this is. We get a fantastic look at the normal, ordinary guardsmen giving their all in the name of the Emperor, and then blindly giving away their loyalty to the heretic Alpha Legion. Yeah, that's right, I said it. Heretics, one and all. It's really interesting how Caden and the other guardsmen just rationalise away their concerns. The chains must mean the Imperial safely protected, the Hydra the ferocity of its defenders. He's just so elated at being saved from certain death by these saviours. He'd literally follow them anywhere. If you've always wondered how the Alpha Legion recruit more followers, then here is a fantastic little glimpse. But as always guys, what did you think of it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support really means a lot to me, it truly does. And if you're new, then please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. If you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.